Hello there, this is Ujames1978, and last week, by sheer coincidence, I appear to have watched 5 of the contenders for the title of stupidest and almost pointless movie ever made, back to back. Starting with Chronicles, which is literally nothing but a found-footage supervillain and superhero origin movie that is only slightly less predictable than Gravity, because a bullied, lonely, and emotionally troubled teenager who is unable to deal with the fact that his mother is dying of cancer, and whose father is only able to cope by getting drunk and taking his frustration out on him, suddenly gains superpowers? I wonder what's going to happen next. A couple of nights later, I watched Machete, which, to its credit as a satire, was made with the deliberate intention of taking a Pacific Ocean's worth of piss out of itself and the entire action movie genre. But then straight after that, on the very same night, I watched Sin City, which during what felt like the few minutes of actual film between the pretentious and seemingly endless full end credit sequences bookmarking the short stories in that anthology, was just as ridiculously over the top in its absurd portrayal of the lone and grievously wronged hyper-masculine anti-hero taking on the corrupt and decadent elite to protect and or avenge the innocent in a society which dismisses and rejects, if not outright condemns him, complete with a seemingly endless parade of fetishized male fantasies of ideal quote-unquote strong female characters, but unlike Machete though, plays it all completely straight and full of sincere pontification, apparently not understanding why, unless you're mixing it up with another genre such as fantasy, unironic, hard-boiled PI-style internal monologues went out with zoot suits and spats, and thus ironically, while Machete is a satire, Sin City becomes the far greater joke.
Great, meaning large or immense, we use it in the pejorative sense!
And look, Frank Miller definitely isn't patronisingly racist or homophobic, because in one of his internal monologues, a protagonist of one of the short stories explains that the fantasy sex object strutting around and posing erotically in nothing but a thong is a quote-unquote dyke, his word, adding that he can't understand why she would ever choose to be a dyke with a body like that, because obviously only ugly women ever choose to be dykes because they are resentful of or even outright hate men, and one of the sex workers in another short story in this film is a silent Japanese assassin who slaughters people with katanas and other traditional Japanese weapons. Hashtag, this is what a feminist looks like. Meaning that ultimately, even more so than 300, The Dark Knight Returns and Fight Club, which all arguably have at least some artistic merit in themselves, Sin City's only real reason to exist is to serve as an enlightening but terrifying insight into the self-righteous martyr complex which drives the entire manosphere, alt-right movement, and every other not fascist movement composed entirely of angry and insecure white boys along with their token supporters throwing a tantrum because the world doesn't revolve around them anymore. And this being the case, I wasn't at all surprised to see Quentin Tarantino listed in one of those endless credit reels as a guest director of this self-righteous and yet at the same time self-pitying MRA porn. But moving on though, the next night I watched Splice, which can literally be summed up by this infamous scene from Star Trek The Next Generation.
Data, I am not talking about parenting. I am talking about the extraordinary consequences of creating a new life.
Does that not describe becoming a parent, sir?
And then most recently, a couple of nights ago, I watched Cabin in the Woods. You know what's worse than showing the scientist or other puppet master at the end of the movie killing any mystery, doubt, or suspension of disbelief stone dead by showing us that the evil force manipulating the carnage was merely another human being, as they did at the end of the Belko experiment? Doing so at the beginning of the film. Ah, but you, James, you obviously don't understand. This is a horror comedy, and using the term comedy or a joke to describe what you say or do automatically renders it immune to any and all criticism or consequences of any kind. Even if I accept that hypocritical and self-serving non-argument, if it's a comedy, then why aren't I laughing? And even then, back in the early 90s, while I was still in my mid-teens, I saw a kid-friendly family comedy, the title of which I can no longer remember, based upon the zapped into the TV trope that had pretty much exactly the same premise. A hell-based TV network trapping people inside TV programs and killing them as spectacularly as possible in order to entertain Satan. But even if I hadn't seen that film around a quarter of a century ago, killing any claims to creativity or originality stone dead, I still would have immediately understood that this was a metatextual deconstruction of the entire horror movie genre, with the supposedly ancient but now elaborate reality TV style annual ritual sacrifice of the whore, the athlete, the scholar and the fool, with the virgin usually being the lone survivor, representing the archetypal horror movie character tropes, complete with the contrived use of drugs to make these otherwise rational, normal people more horny, aggressive and stupid, including a deliberately absurd use of a gas which somehow suddenly makes the guy who just said that they should stick together announce that they should split up, as well as a subplot about how the only country with a better track record than America when it comes to making horror movies, setting up elaborate reality TV style human sacrifices to appease the ancients, is Japan. Ah, but did you also get that the ancients who the sacrifices meant to appease are an analogy for the most base aspects of humanity that would destroy the world if they were unleashed, and therefore our argument is that horror movies and other violent, gore-filled entertainment keep them dormant by satisfying our secret lust for carnage, and therefore, yes, filmmakers, very clever. Here, let me give you a good job sticker and put Cabin in the Woods up on the fridge so that everyone can see how clever you are. Because seriously, this is like when Donald Trump was told about uranium for the first time in his life and then talked in a press conference as if he were the only person in the world who knew of its existence. Also, do you think that the writer of this garbage deliberately contrived hundreds of otherwise useless horror movie monsters being locked up in cells inside the control center with literally only a door between them and the hundreds or even thousands of squishy and blood-filled human staff, as well as a red button which should have been labelled "Press to begin the third act" with poetically just carnage and bloodshed, simply so that he could recreate the carnage that destroyed the initiative at the end of Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 4? It was co-written and produced by Joss Whedon, and the other co-writer and director also wrote for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mystery solved! So in conclusion then, I think that the takeaway from this entire experience is that
I'm better than you!
And so rather than continuing to debase myself and waste my time with your worthless and inferior peasant cinema, please excuse me while I watch another obscure black and white old Japanese movie to prove once again just how innately superior I am.
A crowd of us are going down the multiplex tonight to see the new Schwarzenegger film, Jingle All the Way, and we wondered if you'd want to come, and you would say no, because I've walked in space. Seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger's latest poorly conceived flimsy comedy vehicle holds few thrills for me now.
Thanks for listening, and if you'd like to support my channels, then the link to my new Patreon page is listed down as your underbar, or if a one-off donation rather than a monthly pledge is more suitable for you, then the link to my tip jar, aka my paypal.me page, is also linked below. Just think of it as me holding out my busker's hat at the end of the performance.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.